not going to start with the overture to Mussorgsky?
I couldn't believe that you sent me that.
Oh, we're going live, so
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom here. Are we real loud? It sounds okay. I want to make sure to fill the sanctuary with my voice. But we welcome you, those of you who are here in the sanctuary. We welcome all of you who are joining us from home, joining us through either YouTube or our own site or Facebook. Sukkot Shalom means a sukkah of peace, a shelter of peace, a shelter that is very open and embracing, a sanctuary that is not defined only by its own walls. And so we expand our sanctuary on this Shabbat to include all those who are joining us virtually or in person. So we welcome you in this sanctuary, in this sacred space, at this sacred time of Shabbat.
Please join me in singing.
Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. With thanksgiving, I'll be a living sanctuary for you. Yai, lai, lai, lai. 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 Yai, lai, 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 lai. Yai, lai, lai, lai. Yai, lai, lai.
We welcome Shabbat together, lighting Shabbat candles, page 2 of the prayer book.
I'll invite you to join me in singing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Shabbat is a time of love, a honeymoon in Kabbalat Shabbat. If we turn to page 11, these words of Kol Dodi from Song of Songs, Song of Solomon. My beloved is mine, and I am my beloved's. Whoops.
Hark, my beloved comes over the mountain, running and leaping and dancing my way. They run to the window and peer through the curtain. Rise up, my love, let's go away. Hark, my beloved comes over the mountain, running and leaping and dancing my way. They run to the window and peer through the curtain. Rise up, my love, let's go away. The light of the sun's here to stay, and the rain, she is done, and the winter is done, and the time for singing is come. Hark, my beloved comes over the mountain, running and leaping and dancing my way. They run to the window and peer through the curtain. Rise up, my love, let's go away.
Bottom of page 14, we have sung songs from Song of Songs. Now we add in from the book of Psalms, from Psalm 97, the third stanza. Light is sown for the righteous, radiance for the upright.
Or Zarua Latzadik U'yishrei lev simcha. Or Zarua Latzadik ישרי לב שמחה. אור זרוע לצדיק וישרי לב שמחה. וישרי לב שמחה. אור זרוע לצדיק וישרי לב שמחה. וישרי לב שמחה. אור זרוע לצדיק וישרי לב שמחה.
Lecha Dodi, welcoming the Sabbath bride, the Sabbath queen, page 20 and 21.
לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה. שמור וזכור בדיבור אחד, ישמיענו אל המיוחד. אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, לשם ותפארת אין לתחילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם נסוכה. סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה. בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך אמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה.
Turning to page 28. Praising God who's to be praised, praising God who's to be praised, now and forever. If you're comfortable standing, physically or in spirit, we join together in the Baruch Hu.
Yai lai lai, yai lai lai lai, yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Barechu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai hamevorach leolam va'ed.
On page 31, if you'll join me in reading, praise to you, Adonai our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai ha'ma'ariv aravim. Page 34, we join together. Hear, O Israel, Adonai our God. Adonai is one.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad.
Please be seated. The words of Vahavta set to music. Julie Silver.
Love Adonai your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words which I command you on this day shall be in your heart, shall be in your heart. Teach them faithfully unto your children. Speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. Bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be a symbol between your eyes. Write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates, and upon your gates. Teach them faithfully unto your children. Speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise.
I'm sure we have images in our own mind right now of those who are trying to escape from oppression, from new pharaohs, from those who try to control the world. And being refugees and seeking safety and shelter is part of our narrative, our story. For we were refugees from Egypt, being chased down by the might of the most powerful nation in the world at that time, and coming to the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea, and thinking that there was no way across except the water split, they walked on dry land, they were safe. As we pray for safety for all those who are trying to escape oppression and war and danger, let us turn those words into our prayer. Page 40.
Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Mi chamocha nedar ba'kodesh. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai. Mi chamocha nedar ba'kodesh. Nora tehilot osefele. Nora tehilot osefele. Adonai imloch leolam va'ed. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai.
Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. Blessed is the Eternal One, Redeemer of Israel. On the top of page 43, the evening prayer for peace, asking God to spread over us and all the world a Sukkot Shalom, a shelter of peace.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu. Hashkivenu Eloheinu l'shalom. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms.
We turn now to our main section of tefillah, of prayer, of our Shabbat evening liturgy. On page 46, we have the opening words of our Amidah, words that come from our Psalms, where we pray and ask God to open our lips and let our mouths declare God's glory. And we have the opportunity to offer our own blessings of praise and thanksgiving, as well as those that come from our prayer book. If you're comfortable, we'll rise in body or spirit as we sing together on page 46.
Adonai, Shefatai tiftach ufi agi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise.
Page 48.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, ve'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Koneh HaKol, V'Zocher Chazdei Avot V'Imachot, U'Mevi Geula Livnei V'Nehem, Le'ma'an Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, V'Ezrat Sarah.
Page 52. Atah kadosh v'shikha kadosh, kadoshim b'chol yom yachalu chasela, Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el ha'kadosh. You are holy, your name is holy, and those who are holy praise you every day. Blessed are you, Adonai, the holy God. We'll take a moment now for our own silent prayer and reflection, and we'll join together on page 62.
Ptach libi b'toratecha, Ptach libi b'toratecha, u'b'mitzvotecha, Tirdof nafshi Asel man shmecha Asel man yiminecha Asel man kedushatecha Asel man Toratecha Yiyu leratzon Imrefi vegyon Libi lefanecha Libi lefanecha Adonai Suri Goali Asel man shemecha Asel man yiminecha Asel man kedushatecha Asel man Toratecha
You may be seated. This afternoon, I listened to a harrowing story of one of the progressive rabbis from the city of Odessa in Ukraine who escaped with her daughter and 40 families from her congregation to safer ground in Poland. Some are trying to stay in Poland, some are trying to go to Israel. And the fear and the pain that she described were real and palpable. So tonight, as we pray these words of healing, I'd like to offer just a short reading. When I panic, God, teach me patience. When I fear, teach me faith. When I doubt myself, teach me confidence. When I despair, teach me hope. When I lose perspective, show me the way back to love, back to life, back to you. We offer these prayers of healing tonight for all of those who are in need of healing, whether here in our own community or across the world. We'll join together on page 253, these words of healing.
Sheberach avotenu mikor habracha limotenu. May the source of strength who blessed the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Yisheberach imotenu mikor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuge renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
So in this series of sermons I've been giving once a month in anticipation of my retirement, I've tried to look at my own personal development, my own education, how I have grown as a rabbi, how I've changed my own way of thinking over these 40 years of being a rabbi. And so tonight, in talking about Israel and America, I'm not going to analyze the politics or history as much as I'm going to talk about my own personal experience and my own personal relationship. I remain drawn to Israel. I consider myself loyal to the concepts of Zionism, deeply engaged in the life of Israel. But my view has changed dramatically over time. Like many of you, my first impressions of Israel were based on the movie Exodus of 1964, and then the Six-Day War of 1967. My first visit to Israel was in 1974 when I started the program at Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem. And I arrived in early June of 1974, and it was 9 months after the Yom Kippur War. Israel was in PTSD. They were traumatized. Israel was depressed. The people I met with were very worried, and the image that they had of themselves had changed dramatically. Jerusalem in 1974 was a small town. Everyone kind of knew each other. I spent a lot of time in the old city, which at that time was basically a sand pit. It was all torn up, a dust bowl, as they were trying to put in new sewage pipes and buildings and digging, but there was really nothing there. There was a certain, at least for me, the idealism of the kibbutz movement. The leadership, Golda Meir was the prime minister at the time, but there were the others like Yitzhak Rabin, who were all gathered around, and the leadership were what's called the Palmach generation. They were the generation of the young fighters of 1948, the Ari Ben Kanans. The Ari Ben Kanans, who might have been 20 in 1948, were now the leaders in 1974. And indeed, my teachers at Hebrew Union College, they're no longer around, were often telling us stories of being Haganah fighters fighting in the old city in 1948. There was something heroic, there was something very special about all of that atmosphere. And I spent almost the entire year in Jerusalem, except for some weekend trips that we were taking, but no one went to Tel Aviv. That was avoided. That was a different world. Now, even in 1974, change was beginning to happen. This was the beginning of a group called Gush Emunim. They were the settlers, the very beginning settlers. And they were in Kiryat Arba in Hebron. They were radical ultra-nationalists, but they didn't really have any real power in Israel at the time. Most of what I was taught and raised with in 1974 and that time period were the shared values of the labor Zionists. And so in 1977, there was a shock that happened when Menachem Begin became prime minister. Because from 1948 to 1977, Israel was completely controlled by the labor Zionists, for good and bad. But Begin built on the resentment that the Mizrahi, the Jews from Arab countries, the Sephardim had towards the Ashkenazic elite, and he was able to win victory. And Begin represented the Irgun from 1948, the terrorists, the battle between two forces. These were not just like Republicans and Democrats, two different parties. These people hated each other. Ben-Gurion had ordered Yitzhak Rabin to bomb the ship, the Altalena, on which Begin was stationed. Begin survived, but others did not. So when Begin became prime minister, that changed things dramatically. Now, I should say again that my talk tonight is personal, my own impressions. It's not fair for me to judge Israel on the basis of it doesn't live up to my own standards. That's not really a fair assessment of a nation. But things changed dramatically with Begin. Also, there were positive parts. That's when Sadat came to Jerusalem in 1978, and there was the hope of peace, that Sinai was given back, that Egypt and Israel were at peace. But then, Israel fighting the PLO, and fighting the PLO then in Lebanon, getting involved in a war in Lebanon. In 1982, on Yom Kippur, or the day before Yom Kippur, there was the Shatila Sabra massacre, a massacre that took place in Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, a massacre that was perpetrated by Maronite Christian phalangists against the Palestinians and Shiites, but Israel was complicit, and Israel was responsible. And so it was that some of my Israeli friends who were officers in Peace Now had asked me to make a statement about Shatila and Sabra. The night before, the Erev of Yom Kippur, 400,000 Israelis came out in Tel Aviv in protest about Begin and Sharon leadership. 400,000, that was about 10% of the entire population. For those of us who tried to organize anti-war events during the Vietnam era, the concept of 10% of the population coming out against the leadership was unbelievable. In terms of values, it spoke to that. Some of you have heard that I went on television on behalf of Peace Now that morning, and then was introduced to my new congregation, or Shalom, in Vernon Hills that evening, and as I started speaking, I was heckled from the congregation. And it was really trial by fire. There was an Israeli who was a member of the congregation who got up and just started heckling me at the very beginning of my sermon. So that was my introduction to being a rabbi, being at least a solo rabbi. But, and then also the Reform rabbis of Chicago also made a statement about Shatila and Sabra, except that there were members of the Chicago Association of Reform Rabbis who were not at that meeting and did not sign that statement, even though it went to press. And it really divided the Reform rabbis of Chicago amongst themselves. And this was not something that Jewish Federation was very happy about at all. But it represented that left-right divide that started, I think, at that point between American Jews and Israel. It was just the beginning of a divide that has taken place. And then with the Intifada in 1987 to 1991, you saw the Palestinians rising up and trying to end the occupation at the time. And then in 1993 was Oslo. And that's when Yossi Beilin and others who were surrounding Shimon Peres were able to create a meeting with the Palestinians and move towards an agreement that even Rabin agreed to. And of course, you know the south lawn of the White House signing of the Oslo Agreement. And there was a sense that that conflict that had existed from 1948 on between the Palestinians and Israelis was now about to be solved. Rabin, who had no love for the Palestinians whatsoever and was as firm a general military leader as you could imagine, had basically decided that Israel could defend its borders against any enemy, but could not defend itself against 12-year-olds with stones within its borders. So this was not a peace based on love, it was a peace based on a divorce. And that was the vision at the time. We happened to be in Israel in 1995, at the time when Oslo was still being discussed by all the groups, and it was our daughter's bat mitzvah, and we were in Jerusalem. We were invited to the 4th of July party at the US consulate, and there, at this party with hamburgers and hot dogs and a band from Texas playing, leaders of the Palestinian Authority, Hanan Ashrari, others, leaders from Israel, Teddy Kollek, Ehud Olmert, who was the mayor of Jerusalem at the time, but who would become prime minister. Everyone was gathered in the most joyful kind of way to celebrate the American 4th of July. And I turned to our daughter and said, this is the garden party for the birth of a new nation. We all expected that everything was going to go very smoothly. And during that same trip, we went and met a small group with Shimon Peres, who said, peace is inevitable. We are on the way to a new Middle East. And we went down to Gaza and had lunch in the Gaza Strip at a fish restaurant on the beach. Everything seemed to be working towards a very bright future when, on November 4th of that year, 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. Now, Rabin again represented that kibbutz Ari Ben Canaan, that image of what the perfect Israel was, and he had been the ambassador to the United States. So Americans knew him. And Israel and America seemed to be so closely tied to each other as the signing on the south lawn of the White House showed. But everything changed with his assassination. Netanyahu became the prime minister again. There are those who believe that Netanyahu was responsible for the assassination of Rabin. That what we have come to learn as the big lie was being used by Netanyahu then to demonize Oslo, and particularly to demonize Rabin, and to be at rallies, not very different from January 6th, rallies where people were holding up signs of Rabin dressed as Hitler. And the demonization of Rabin that took place was something that Netanyahu was absolutely aware of, and for many could never be forgiven. Now, the irony of, back to the distancing between America and Israel, is that as Israel has become more Americanized, I think the divide has increased. Netanyahu brought in a Milton Friedman concept of the economy. Everything was changed, and Israel prospered. It was and is the startup nation. The aspects of American economy are very much there in Israel. If you go to Israel, you'll feel very comfortable in Israel. It feels very American, good and bad. When, again, back growing up, what I knew of Israel, and I imagine many of you as well, was that this was our poor cousin that we had to take care of. That we had to provide for Israel because it was impoverished. It is now within the top 15 most successful economies in the world, third or fourth most powerful military force. There are over 70 billionaires, according to Forbes magazine, in Israel. The top 1% of Israel, of the population, owns over 20% of the economy. And only the United States has a greater disparity between the poor and the rich, and a higher concentration, a narrower concentration of wealth. So it reflects some of the worst in America as well. But ultimately, back to my own impressions, it is not the Israel of 1974, or 67, or 1948. And Israel itself is very divided, something that we are now seeing in our own country, that division between the ultranationalists and the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, and the worst impulses there, and what I would call the Tel Aviv population, secular, educated elite. There's been as well a population transfer. 1 million Jews from the former Soviet Union arrived, and 1 million secular Tel Avivite highly educated Jews have left. So when 1 million people leave a country of 7 million or even 8 million, that's an enormous number. So American Jews and Israelis, there was a sense that we were united. And as I said, the irony is that the more Israel reflected some of the worst of America, the more divided we became. And so just a couple proofs of that. Today you may have seen, or yesterday you may have seen, a picture of former Vice President Pence in Hebron, standing with the leaders of the Kahanists, of Meir Kahane, the most radical of the settlers. You may have also heard that AIPAC, which was always a bipartisan, pro-Israel political organization in America, just endorsed dozens of Republicans who voted against accepting the election results of Biden. And they said, well, we only care about one thing. They're being severely criticized because without an America that's a democracy, Israel is not doing very well. But the fiction that there was a bipartisan support was ruined at the point when Netanyahu came opposing the Iran deal and appeared in Congress against the sitting president of the United States. And it was clear that he also had been lobbying, particularly in the elections against Obama. And when young people have now broken with Israel, they object to having to park their American social justice values on the tarmac at Ben Gurion Airport before coming in to customs. They can't do that. And so there are all those conflicts. So back to the personal. The personal is I'm worried. I'm worried just as I'm worried about the future democracy of the United States right now. But I'm worried about the future nature of Israel as a democratic Jewish state. A democratic Jewish state that is also not even attempting, but controlling the West Bank through the occupation and through the settlements. Even more important than the occupation, the settlements themselves. Because what happens is that the Jewish settlers living in Kiryat Arba, in Hebron, have full citizen rights in Israel, and the people of Hebron, who are Palestinian, do not have those same rights. There are two people living in the same area, controlled by a government, one by a secular government, one by a military government, but still controlled by a single government, and they have different rights. That's not democracy. Israel cannot remain democratic and Jewish with the occupation and the settlements. It cannot remain Jewish if it creates full democracy, because the numbers just aren't there. The Jews will no longer be a majority. And so I don't believe it can last. I don't believe Israel can last the way it is, trying to maintain that conflict between occupation, democracy, and being Jewish. And it is dispiriting, disheartening when I see that. There are things that draw me to Israel very strongly. By the way, I said that Tel Aviv was avoided when in 1974 you would never go there. Now I believe in the two-state solution, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. They're two different places, and I feel very comfortable in Tel Aviv. But I am deeply worried about Israel's direction and future. And I think the connection between American Jews and Israel is in jeopardy. And that divide will grow wider, not through the Orthodox and not through the nationalists. They will maintain their loyalty to Israel. But the vast majority of American Jews, and particularly of the younger generation, will no longer be able to see that same kind of identity and identification with Israel. And a 10-day spring break trip for birthright is not going to change that. I worry about American democracy right now, about human rights, about reproductive rights, about LGBTQ rights and voting rights, but I worry about the democracy of Israel as well. So what's the answer? The answer is that just like in America, we have to be engaged and fight for this democracy. So I think we have to have the same attitude toward Israel itself and do everything we can through the support of the best institutions in Israel that are fighting for democracy. New Israel Fund, Religious Action Center, other organizations that are really trying to keep Israel loyal to the values on which many of us had based our own love for the state and for the people. We have a lot of work still to do. Shabbat Shalom.
We turn now to our concluding prayers. On page 282, on the top of the page, the words of Aleinu L'Shabeach. You may rise in body or spirit as you're comfortable.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שהוא נוטה שמיים ועושה ארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת עוזו בגובה מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא.
Page 287.
ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ושמו אחד.
Page 289. The light of life is a finite flame. Like the Shabbat candles, life is kindled, it burns, it glows. It is radiant with warmth and beauty. But soon it fades, and its substance is consumed, and it is no more. In light we see, in light we are seen. The flames dance and our lives are full, but as night follows day, the candle of our life burns down and gutters. There is an end to the flames. We see no more and are no more seen. Yet we do not despair, for we are more than a memory, slowly fading into the darkness. With our lives we give life. Something of us can never die. We move in the eternal cycle of darkness and death, of light and life. Tonight, the Sukkot Shalom community remembers Bernie Kaplan, Max Zenner, Gerald Goldberg, Noah Fetter, Beryl Ann Shapiro, Henry Vogel, John Gustafson, Robert Leopold Sr., Rosalind Obel, Albert Kersner, Sandra Kaufman, Joseph Schumer, Willa Jacobs, Lee Slott, Eleanor Goldstein, Gino Leo, Myron Cohen, Ina Rosenbaum, Joseph Stein, May Wool, Israel Wool, Gladys Stein, the Honorable Judge Alan Greiman, Alice Stern Fingerhut, Robert Friedman, Josephine Jo Baskin Minnow, Rabbi Martin Wiener. Are there any other names that you would like to recall this evening? We recite together now the words of Mourner's Kaddish, Kaddish Yatom, page 294. Yitgadal v'yitkadash me rabbah, be'alma divarach hiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, b'chayechon uvyomechon uvchaye d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabbah mevarach le'elam omei almaya, Yitbarach v'shabach v'pa'ar v'sharmam v'naseh, v'tadar v't'aleh v't'halal, shmei d'kudesha b'rechu. Le'elam min kol berchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiram b'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be a blessing.
Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael,
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening in person and via live stream. We'd like to remind you about our program on Sunday evening at 7 p.m. Rabbi Gordon will be speaking with David Axelrod. We hope you will join us here in the sanctuary or live on Facebook, YouTube, or our website. We'll see you on Sunday. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.